Welcome, everybody. This is the third in a series of Polaris introductory webinars that we're doing for SILS. This particular one, of course, is on cataloging. So we'll spend the next 45 minutes to an hour giving you a quick overview of cataloging on Polaris. It's kind of a difficult thing to do for a group like this because for a consortium your varied and of your size, everybody tends to have a very different workflow. So it would be very hard for me to pick a cataloging workflow and try to show it to you from beginning to end. So what I'm really going to try to do is introduce you to the bits and pieces of Polaris cataloging. And probably as I introduce some of it, you may go, we don't do that at all. And then at some point, I hope we'll hit a few bits and pieces of the software that you'll go, absolutely, that's how we add bib records, and that's how we add item records, and that's what I would like to see on an item record, that sort of thing. So I think the first thing that I want to introduce you to, I'm going to bring up my Polaris staff client. This is the software we use for anything that's a staff function in Polaris, whether it's circulation, acquisition, serials, and cataloging is right there. Probably the most important piece, and one that's very key in cataloging, is the staff searching. So really, as we spend this hour together, I'm going to go from probably the most fundamental concepts and work our way into a little bit deeper water as we go. But that being said, the most fundamental concept is staff searching. In Polaris, to be able to do staff searching, I can click that bibliographic record toolbar. I can come up here to cataloging and say I want to work on a bibliographic record. But you'll notice that searching for bibliographic records is also associated with the F12 function key. So I can be using Polaris and just press F12 and we get our staff searching. And this is important to cataloging because we can be wanting to modify a bibliographic record or look at a bibliographic record in this example and just type something as simple as unbroken by Hillenbrand. You'll notice I'm doing a keyword search across all fields so I can combine title and author there, and I get my results. And as you would expect, if I double click, we invoke the MARC editor. And that's why staff searching is so important, because we can get to our records that we want to modify that way. This particular MARC record has one bibliographic record linked, and instead of going to the bib record, I can right click and select links and say I want to go straight to the item records. I don't want to see the MARC record first. We just want to see our item record. So that's how we use the staff searching to get to our bib records, our item records, and actually staff searching, this find tool, is how you get to any type of record. You'll notice if I open up this object drop down here, it's how I get to authorities, bibs, item records, record sets, different types of item records, or different types of Polaris records. If we're in the middle of acquisitions or we're in the middle of serials, then the type of objects that we can drop down are specific to the function we're wanting to accomplish. If I come up here to serials check-in, then it's the same find tool, but my options in that drop down are all related to serials records. So it's context sensitive in that sense. But again, the one that I'm most accustomed to doing is the F12 key to do bibliographic record search. And if we're wanting to do a search for, let's say, French-Indian Wars, I enter the search, and in this case I have 7 results, and we can go to any one of these. Really nice feature, I can right click and here is a preview window that I can pop up And the nice thing about the preview window is I can leave it popped up on my desktop. Up here is bib information, in the middle is statistical, and then down here at the bottom are all of the item records. So I can literally scan down through my results set, and that preview window changes as I move up and down. And if I come down to this a few acres of snow, and I see that one of the items is lost and I'm curious about what's going on with that, I can just double click on that and we bring up the full item record, and we can see right there that the circulation status is lost. We'll look at the item record in a little bit more detail, but from a little bit later. But here from the Find tool, I got these results, and if I have a student, say, that needs a printout of the results here, I can even come out here and say print this out in any one of several formats. So that's the Find tool, and actually all of the searching that I have done so far has been very rudimentary. We've pointed out that you can search different objects, but even within bibliographic records, say, the number of fields that you can search by is huge. By default, I search by general keywords. But one of the nice things about the Find tool is if in my workflow, if in what I do at the library, I am usually in the business of first scanning by ISBN, yes, you can search by ISBN, and in fact, I can scan an ISBN right there and retrieve material that way. If what I do predominantly is searching by ISBN, I can come up here to options and say, when I'm logged in as myself, I want this to be my default every time the bibliographic Find tool comes up. So when I close that and I'm in the middle of something else but need to bring up a record, I can press that F12 key, and this time now my default search is by ISBN. And I can scan the ISBN off the book in this case, or type it in. It's real fast and efficient if that's my predominant type of searching. But you can select anything. Me, I'm a Neanderthal, so give me a general keyword search and make that my user default, and away we go. You can also have over here all of these different types of fields that you can limit by. One I think that would be very useful for you, actually there are a lot of them here, but target audience is great. Type of material, if you're just interested in searching for DVDs, for example. We can even enter a very general term, and yet it's limited by DVDs there. Notice you can limit by specific branches. So if you're just interested in titles that have copies at your branch, then you can select your branch. You can even select by collection. So the Find tool gives you a lot of power to selectively get down to just what you want to do. So that's a good introduction of the Find tool for finding material that's already in the database. And as I said, this is of course a great way if you need to modify records that are already here. Just do a bibliographic search. I did a double click and we're here at the mark record for that title we clicked on. Make it go away and we're right back at our result set. So that's how you bring up bibliographic records that are already in the database. Now what I want to do is talk very quickly about how we get bib records in the database, and in the course of looking at the various ways of doing it, it'll introduce us to the Mark Editor and some of the other tools that we use to work with bib records. But I want to actually talk about 5 or so different methods for getting the records in. I think nowadays a lot of libraries, the predominant method for getting bibliographic records into the system is batch loading them. I use a utility of some type, put together 1, 5, 15, 20 MARC records, and then we load them in as a batch. And I'm going to show you that actually as the last method that I show you. So I want to introduce you to all the different types. And again, some of these you may use, some you may not, but it'll be a good way to kind of learn about bib records on Polaris. So the simplest way, actually, I shouldn't put it that way, because the easiest way is to actually do copy cataloging and bring the records in. But probably the most fundamental way is to come here and do what not many libraries do nowadays, and that is cataloging from scratch. But most libraries do a little bit of cataloging from scratch here and there in my experience. So I just hit that little button on the toolbar that said I want to start something new, and here are all the different kinds of records in Polaris, and bibliographic record is right there. So if I just want a blank MARC work form, there we go. Work form, a blank screen. And we would add all of the different tags that we needed to. We would update the leader, the MARC, the fixed fields, and so on. So that's the first method. Rarely see anyone do that, because even if you're cataloging from scratch. Now here's the second method. Just a second ago we did this. We said I want a new record, and we said bibliographic record, but down here I said no template. But templates are pretty neat. We deliver a set of about a dozen standard templates, and it's very easy for you to create your own templates. But once you have a template in place, then you can move on down through and select a template. And when you have selected a template to do your cataloging, then your bibliographic record starts out with predefined values. So I was actually talking to a library the other day, and they catalog video games. And of course it's very hard to find MARC records for video games. So we talked about creating a template that would pre-populate the fields for them. So you can have a template for video games. It's really, you can have an unlimited number of templates. And if you're cataloging just books from scratch, you can actually just have a brief book template and say that's where we're going. And in fact, if you're going to be doing several of them, you can say make that my default. So from now on, when I say I want to start a new bibliographic record, that's the template I always want to use. One really nice thing about Polaris, if you, let's say you spend all morning or all day cataloging, let's say a local genealogical publication, and the local genealogical association publishes a lot of stuff. So their bib records, once you've done one, the rest will look a lot like the one that you just did. You can take any record, and I'm really just going to grab any record here to use as an example. You can be working on any bib record, whether it's one in your database or one that you just finished cataloging from scratch, and you can say I want to save this bib record as a template because I'm going to catalog a lot more just like this one, and we'll call this our SILS template. And now you'll notice over here at the top we have bibliographic template 816. It's a brand new template, and typically you would come into these values and take out the very specific stuff that was part of the bib record that you started your template with and truly turn it into a template. But some of the stuff like the physical description and that you might leave the same because maybe the publisher is the same when you use this template. If you've got some subject headings and that sort of thing that would all be the same, you can leave them in there. So that gives you the idea of what it's like to create bibliographic records from scratch, but with the added help of being able to use a template. Now if you don't want to use a template, if let's say you've got something by James Patterson and you've got something that is very much just like, let's bring up this bibliographic record. Let's say what I need to catalog is published by Little Brown and Company, and almost all of this information is very much the same. I don't need to use a template to create this. I can come up again to that new button while I'm looking at a MARC record and say, copy this existing work form. Just copy this MARC record that I'm looking at. And now we have a new bibliographic record, and if perhaps the only thing that has changed is the publication year, and I know that's probably a very simplistic example, but gives you the idea, then we can change that. And then in the fixed fields, we might want to change that as well. Make your change, and as soon as I save that, then it's saved. Now these bibliographic records are so much alike, and I wanted to make sure to show you this. It has flagged this as a potential duplicate. One thing I really like about Polaris is here is the existing record, here's the one that I copied, and I'm trying to add a new to the system, and it's telling us right here what rules it matched on. So the two records, the LCCNs match and the ISBNs match. And I go, oh, that's right. I should probably cancel that save and then go into the 020, and if I've got the book in hand, maybe scan the new ISBN in and the OCLC number as well. So that is an example of taking an existing bibliographic record and making a copy of it. Now, the next example. All of the searching that we've been doing in our database has involved searching material that's just in our, in your case, it would be in the SILS catalog, the Polaris SILS catalog. So if I come out here and type Meyer, these are all titles in my existing database. If you will notice, right up here at the top, I have a tab for databases. So if you're looking for something, let's say landscaping in Prince Edward Island, and you're trying to catalog that, or something that uses those words, we're doing a general keyword search, and you don't have anything in your existing database, you don't have a record to copy, you don't want to do original cataloging, you want to grab a record from somewhere else, whether it's OCLC, whether it's Amicus, whatever sources you use. Polaris has a tab up here for databases, and I have a number of databases set up. In fact, I've got Amicus set up. Just before we got together here, I set up Toronto Public Library as a source. We have OCLC on here, we have Sky River on here, which is Innovative Zone cataloging utility, a bunch of different sources, Michigan eLibrary. And I can select some of these or come over here and select all of them and say, let's catch a wide net. Let's see, this is an obscure piece, and let's see if anybody has it anywhere. And you see down here, it's doing a search, and I probably used an obscure enough example that we're not going to find any anywhere. So let's go back to our example. What did we do? Landscaping. I guess they don't do a lot of landscaping in Prince Edward Island. How about landscaping in Alberta? Nope. Okay, let's not be quite that obscure. How about, I've got a book here that's about opera by Monteverdi. There we go. That's a little bit better. But you see how when I do a search, right down here for each of my targets, it's telling me how many titles it has found at each one of those locations. Amicus has 500, probably has more than that. They probably have limited the number of results that it's going to bring back, so we probably need to be more specific. Library of Congress, 212, Michigan Library, 412, OCLC, 103, Toronto Public Library, 97. So if I want to look at the results from any one of these, I just double click. So I double clicked on Toronto Public Library, and it has brought back all 97 titles. And let's maximize that screen so we can see all of our results. Anytime you're in Polaris, you can just click on a column header to resort by that. So if I'm looking for a particular work by a particular author, I can click on the author column header, the title column header, publication date. And remember, I searched by just general keyword because I, for our example, wasn't looking for anything specific. But naturally, you can search by ISBN. You can search by all sorts of things. But I wanted to get what we got here, an example of all sorts of things. So if you do find at Toronto an example of what you're specifically looking for, to open it up, all we need to do, and I'm looking for what might be a real good example here. How about Monteverdi's Last Operas? Just double click on that, and we see the bibliographic record in our MARC editor. And if you look up here at the top, it says New Bibliographic Record. So this is the record brought in to my MARC editor from Toronto Public. When I click the Save button, it will save this to Polaris. That is essentially the entire process of importing a record, one by one, using the Z3950 protocol through the Polaris staff client. Now, we've taken a few glances here at the MARC editor. One of my favorite features of the Polaris MARC editor is this button here over in the margin. If I click on that, it gives me a look at what this title would look like in my pack as soon as I saved it to my local catalog. And that's not just an approximation. That is exactly what it would look like at my library, my Red Rock library. And if I click this other button, we toggle right back to the MARC. Now, when I bring a MARC record into Polaris, several things happen. If I click Save, they will all happen no matter what. But if I want to do them selectively one by one, I can click on these three toolbar buttons. This one checks for duplicates. This one checks the headings. This one checks the MARC 21 format. This one checks the authority headings. But to do all three of those automatically at once, I just click Save. It's checking the MARC authorities. It found one of these headings that did not match an authority heading. And I'm just going to say Continue Saving. And it found all of the MARC cataloging fine, and this record was not a duplicate of something already in my database. Now if you look up here at the top, it says bibliographic record, and there is a number. It no longer says New Bibliographic Record. We have just imported this MARC record into Polaris. And as I said, if you remember back to when we did this search, we might have searched Opera Monteverdi against just our catalog, but I came over to this Databases tab, and you can have all kinds of Z3950 libraries set up here, whoever you check, and then you can search them all at once, in addition to your own database if you like, and they come back and you can import them. So that's the process of bringing in a MARC record just through doing a staff search, but including other databases from anywhere around the country, around the continent, around the world. Now, let's talk about the last method for getting MARC records into your system, and that is batch loading. So if your library has some sort of utility that you use for getting MARC records, whether again it's OCLC. There are a lot of nice standalone programs. There's a program called Bookware that allows you to visit Z3950 libraries and see what they've got and save those MARC records to your local PC. But whether you're using that or whether you're using something like OCLC and saving MARC records to your PC, once they're in a batch file on your PC, you need to get them into Polaris. So you come to Utilities, and right there is our option to import. When you do an import, there are a number of import profiles, and each of your libraries can have their own import profiles. These import profiles typically represent different scenarios or settings in which you load MARC records. Tomorrow we do a session on acquisitions, and we'll talk about when you order records from someone like ULS. Then you load those MARC order records with one profile, and then you may come along later and say, now I've got full MARC records to overlay those brief records, and I use this profile when I have those kinds of records. Or if you're using a utility like Bookware or some other MARC utility, and you just have bib records that you want to put into the system and then add item records to them, then I have just a basic profile. Polaris delivers a set of just basic profiles for you to start using or to copy and modify. So I'm going to say let's go ahead and add records, and I have a set of I think 15 or so MARC records that I've pulled together to load into the system. So I tell the software where on my PC to find those records, and I say import. Now what Polaris does is it submits that file to the software and actually to the database to be processed. And it usually takes anywhere from 15-20 seconds to a minute or two. But what happens when you submit those records for processing is Polaris pops up this import jobs queue. This is a list of all of the import jobs that have been submitted in the recent past. The one that you and I just submitted, you can see the file name there if you paid attention when I selected it, Saskatchewan.mrc, is there, and it's pending. It's telling us that it found 12 MARC records. The nice thing, by the way, about this is I don't need to deal with that at all. If I want to go about my business and go search for records for whatever reason and do cataloging on other stuff entirely, I can. Those records that I submitted, it does not tie up my workstation until they're processed. That processing happens completely in the background at the server. If I want to check the status of them, I can come back to this import jobs queue screen here and refresh and say, oh, you're done. It said pending a second ago, and now it says completed. So those 12 records are now in my Polaris system. Now, Polaris, when you load bibliographic records, Polaris puts them in a batch, and these batches are very, very, very key and fundamental to Polaris. We call these batches record sets. So if I go to cataloging and pull down to record sets, they're right here, and I've got my record set search set up to bring up all the record sets that I've worked on today. And what's very interesting is 2 record sets were created by those 12 records that we loaded just seconds ago. And this is a very interesting concept in Polaris. Basically, you use that load profile to decide how the records get processed. And in that profile that I used, I said, if you find any records that are perfect and ready to go, no duplicates, no authority problems, no MARC encoding, I want those records to be marked final. They're ready for prime time, and right now those 10 records are displaying in the catalog. That's how I set up my profile to process those records. But this second record set that you see here, you notice it has provisional in the file name. What I said was, if you find any potential duplicates or you find any problems with the mark encoding, I want to hand touch those. So in real life, you may want to pop up the final records and look at them, but you may not. They're ready to go. By the way you've got it set up, they're ready for prime time. But the provisional ones definitely have a problem. You don't know what they are yet, unless you run the report that came out when the load was done. But here are those 2 records in that provisional record set, and if I pop one up, you'll notice, again, here's that mark editor we've looked at a couple of times. If I pop this up right over here, notice where it says record status is provisional. If I go to save this, which is really the only thing I have to do to find out what the problem is, we find out immediately. Check for duplicates. That was the problem. In my profile, I said I'm going to load, whenever I load records using this profile, if there are any potential duplicates, let me know. So here is the record that I'm trying to load, and its status is provisional, and here is the record that was already in my database, and Polaris tells me that we have an author-title match. I can pop the records up and look at them. I can go ahead and say do a replace, which would essentially be a merge. Or I can say just continue saving, which would mean save this new record in addition to that existing one. And typically you would go in and look at each one, depending on whether your policy was to go ahead and merge them or leave them both there. That's a judgment call, and that's why you have the provisional status, because it gives you the chance to make that, to hand touch those records and make the decision. So I'm going to leave that one provisional. We go to the second one, and let's do a save here as well. And same thing here. We got our duplicate check going on, and in this case, there's the record we're bringing in. There's the record that's already in my database with one record, and here are all of the match points that matched, which caused these 2 to be flagged as duplicates. The interesting thing is, if we do go ahead and replace the selected record, this record is the existing record, and it has one linked item. It may have all kind of holds or whatever. Or the record that we brought in, we might have set up our profile to actually create item records, so it's conceivable in a potential duplicate that you would have items on both records. If I go ahead and say replace that, all those item records will be merged, and the holds, if there are holds on either or both, they will be merged as well and interfiled by the date the hold was placed. So we go ahead and do that merge. While we're here on the mark record, again, just a few very interesting aspects of the mark editor in Polaris. This is true of any record on Polaris. If we come down to the properties option, virtually every screen has, or every record has, a file properties screen, and they're very useful. There's some basic information there, and on the About tab it tells us who created this record, who last modified this record, what the import date was, and what the import file was. So if there was something kind of wonky on this record and we're not sure why it got processed or loaded a certain way, we can actually go back. If you remember, when we did that import of records, there was that import jobs queue. This is that thing we looked at that showed us the status of the different loads that we did. This is the one that we just did. And when we were looking at that mark record, it said that mark record was loaded as part of this Saskatchewan.mrc file. So if you need to trace back and see how this was loaded, this is not just a list of loads that have happened. Behind each one of these line items is also a load report. So again, if you want to track back and find out exactly what options come into play when it was loaded, what profile was used in determining that, and as part of this report, there is actually a line item for each bibliographic record that was loaded. In cases where automatic authority control kicked in, all of that is here. So you're never left wondering how or why certain things happened during the load. At the end of that report are statistics. So here's where it tells us 10 of our 12 records were set to final, 2 were set to provisional, and 8 records were generated by automatic authority control. And there were 12 total records read from the file, so forth. So it's a lot of good information. You typically don't bring these reports up every time you do a load, but they're there in those odd cases where you have an error, where you have a problem. Now I just want to point out before we stop talking about these batch loads, I've mentioned a number of times that the profiles determine how the records are processed when you batch load them into Polaris. Let me just show you that profile manager. This is where you determine what happens to your bibliographic records when they're loaded. That one we used just a second ago was this one here. I mentioned as we were talking about doing the batch load that you can have a profile for order records from EDI vendors. Then you can have a separate profile for when you overlay those records. If any of your libraries get shelf-ready material, then how do we process those shelf-ready MARC records that also have lots of great item detail and even barcodes on the MARC record? Polaris handles those wonderfully. But all the magic for each one of these different scenarios, each one of these load profiles, is inside here. So let's look at that load profile that we used to load those 12 records we just did. So I just double click there. I won't spend too much time here because actually the load profile is very powerful and has a lot of options. So when I click on this bibliographic record tab here at the top, we see all of the variables that we can set, all of the choices we can make that determine how these records are processed. You can say when I load records with a given profile for a given scenario, whether they display in pack. You can say I want specific MARC tags. When I use this profile, you can specify certain MARC tags to be deleted. You identify whether you want it to perform MARC 21 validation or not, and whether you want it to perform authority control or not. If this were a profile for just brief MARC records that you get, say, from an acquisitions vendor, and you intend to get full MARC records later, you may not care for it to do MARC 21 validation, because you're going to overlay this record later anyway. Same thing here with authorities. But you definitely may want it to do duplicate detection. I'll just leave those on. Now, when duplicate detection happens, what do you want to have go on? The first thing you decide is what detection rules do you want to use. At the system level, there is a default set of very, very detailed duplicate detection rules that satisfy most libraries most of the time. But you can set up a profile that overrides that and says, and the example I hear all the time for this is, well, when I work with Midwest Tape for most of my media, and Midwest Tape records really duplicate check best when they check UPC code. So instead of using all the various different rules that are the default system rules, when I use this profile, again, say for Midwest Tape, when I load records from Midwest Tape, I want those to duplicate check on UPC. So if a suspected duplicate is found, here you say how to do the duplicate detection, and then you determine what happens if a duplicate is found. Now, you and I saw this. We had 12 records. 2 of them were flagged as duplicates, and this profile that we used said if you find duplicates, just mark them as provisional. And that's what we showed you. But you have other options. You can just say automatically, I want to save that incoming record as final, but don't replace the existing record. Leave the 2 suspected duplicates in there. Or you can say here, don't leave them both in there. If you suspect a duplicate, in this scenario, I always expect to be loading better records over worse records, so just replace existing records with what's in here. Now, this is a fun one. You can say for this load profile, I want you to compare the encoding level on the 2 records. And if they match, I want you to save the incoming record as final and replace the database record, or reject the incoming record, or save the incoming record as provisional. This is really handy with order records. Let's say you're reordering a bunch of copies of Unbroken, and you've already got an awesome MARC record in the database, but you've got this brief record that you're loading in, and it's got order data, say in a 970 tag. So you can say, well, if I've already got an awesome record in there, compare the encoding level, and I want to keep the good record. But when you go ahead and merge the records, I want you to keep the 970 tags on my brief record and move them over to my nice, good, existing order record for Unbroken. So you can still use Unbroken as a basis for your acquisitions order. But the bib record, the underlying bib record, is now the full record that you already had. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. So if anything, and again, when you get your training, you'll go into this screen and these options in much, much greater detail. Hopefully this gives you a sense of, if your head's not spinning, or even if your head is spinning, it gives you a sense of all the flexibility and power that you will have. I don't want to continue because I don't want to mess up that profile that I had. If you are creating item records, if any of you do create item records off of like 949 tags on your bibliographic records, Polaris has a whole screen, and we won't go into this in too much detail, but here's a whole screen that says I do want to build item records and expect to find item data in a 949, and you completely match all of your 949 subtags to the fields on the Polaris item record. So that's a great place to transition into the item record. We've spent a lot of time talking about bibliographic records. But what about the item record? I'm going to come out and we're going to look for the help by Catherine Stockett. So I used my staff searching again here. And here they all are. And in one glance from my results set here, it's easy to see the different formats that we have. I have the help in a number of different formats. For each format, it shows you the number of linked items, and it also shows you the number of holds for each. So in this example, for example, I've got 19 copies of the large print. We've shown you a couple of times where if I double click on this line item, because I searched for bib records, if I double click, it will take me to the MARC record. And remember, from the MARC record, we can get a preview of exactly how it looks in the online catalog. We can even look at the where is it to see the availability there. But let's say right off the bat we know we want to go look at those 19 item records. We're not going to be doing any bib cataloging, and in fact everything I'm doing is governed by permissions. So if you've got a cataloger that works with bibliographic records, they would be able to come into the MARC record, but you might have other staff that don't even have the permission to bring up the bibliographic record, or maybe only bring it up in read-only mode. But in my job, I may come down here, right-click on the title, and say, I don't need to see the bib, I want to go straight to the item records. Now, because there are 19 of these, I get an entire list of them. And I can resort by assigned branch. By the way, it kind of depends on what the consortium leadership decide, but you can have this list in a consortium presented in a number of ways. If I'm at Bedford Falls Public Library and we decide that I don't need to see everybody else's items, then this screen would only come up with Bedford Falls Public Library items. But maybe you do want to see other people's items in here, but if I go into Bedford Falls because I'm at Bedford Falls, I will have the ability to bring up the record and, according to my permissions, edit those records. But maybe even though I'm allowed in this list to see what copies are at other libraries in the consortium, you may set it up so that if I'm Bedford Falls and I pop up a Red Rock copy, then this all might be read-only. So I can't delete Red Rock, I can't modify, I can't create Red Rock, I can just see them. But if I'm Bedford Falls, I'm perfectly fine to go in and I have it in not just read-only mode, but in modify mode. It all depends on your permissions. So this is the Polaris item record. There are 5 what we call views, 5 different pages of this screen. This is the first view that we call cataloging. So you notice down here, most of these are circulation parameters. Excuse me, I had to cough. Circulation parameters down here. Up here we see who actually owns this material, what location they're assigned to, collection code, shelf location, circulation status is here. We can go ahead and set that to in repair if we want. Next view down is the circulation view. This is a great view for tech services staff and public services staff. And remember, you can present this screen to public services staff in read-only mode. So you don't have to worry about giving them access to the full item record. You can make it so that they can see it but not change anything on it. But they get the benefit of seeing who the current borrower is, who this is held for, if it's on the hold shelf, what the last use was, what the last location was, where it was checked in. All of your transit information is up here. Next page down is source and acquisitions. You can see your funding source. You can put donor information in here if you want. Next view down are your notes. Most systems have like a check-in note. You have public notes, non-public notes. These are blocking notes. So if you want to have an item record that says check for 3 DVDs, that kind of note that you want to pop up at check-in, check-out, that goes right here. Right here is probably my favorite view of this record. This is the history view. Depending on how long you want to keep the history, Polaris will keep the entire life cycle of this item record. Most of what I've got here is related to cataloging information, but once this goes into circulation, it will say check in, check out, lost, lost and paid, found, checked out, placed on hold. Every aspect, even the overdue notices, everything is listed here. So it's real easy to go back and figure out what has gone on with a record. So that's the item record. The last view down here is course reserves, which is, of course, specific almost entirely to academic libraries. So that is the item record, and I'm going to close that. Obviously, when we pop up an item record, we can make a change, and that's how you edit it. If we're adding just one more copy of the help, and it's for the same library, same collection, and everything, just like we did with the bib. You can say, copy this existing work form, and I would probably scan a new barcode number. Definitely scan a new barcode. And now we've got another copy. Oops. In my little example, I actually used a duplicate barcode, so let's just put something in there that's not going to match an existing barcode. And away we go. Now we've added an item. Now that's modifying one by one. Polaris has incredible power in doing modifications in batch. So let's say, for example, that whoever cataloged this, you notice all these copies here for Bedford Falls, they put that AFIC prefix in, and let's say that we don't want the prefix on the call number. Rather than modifying each of those item records individually, I can select the ones that I want to change. Again, I have to have permission to change Bedford Falls item records. But I can select ad hoc bulk change and say, I want to change the call number. And I want the classification number to just say stock it and not AFIC stock it. Now, it didn't change, and I'll tell you why. As I was doing that, I didn't realize how they had cataloged. Notice, and this is an option you can choose, I brought up one of the items. The call number is actually broken down into different components. Some libraries will take those prefixes like JFIC, AFIC, and that and put it all on one line in the classification scheme. Others will split it out as we've done here. So here's what I really wanted to do. I'm going to select all of those again. If anything, this is a good example of how quick and easy you can figure these things out. So that AFIC is in the call number prefix. So I'm going to say I want to make a change to it, but I'm going to leave it blank. And that's going to take that prefix out. And now we've standardized all of those. Those ad hoc bulk changes can change virtually any and every field on the item record. So this is how you change what library things are assigned to, what collection they're assigned to. You can change certain circ statuses, whether something's holdable or not, whether it circulates or not, anything about the call number. You can add bulk changes to notes. So if you want to take everything in your media collection and say, I want everything in my media collection to have a note that pops up that says check for a disc, whether it's a CD, DVD, you can make a block change to the blocking notes and either replace any notes that may be in there already or just append this note to notes that are already in there. So it's very powerful. So the ad hoc bulk changing is very handy and efficient right here as you're working with all the items attached to a single bibliographic record. Even if you're on in acquisitions, a purchase order and an invoice, and you pop up all the items that are relative to that PO or the invoice. There is another way to make batch changes. Rather than finding a bib record or a PO and saying I want to change all the item records, you can actually, in this case I'm going to do an item search. This is my staff searching again. I've got my default set to barcode, but we're going to change our search out here to keyword fields. And I'm going to say I want to bring up all of the, notice I've got limit by a branch, so I'm going to pick my branch and say I want to also select everything in my DVD collection. And literally at this point I can do a search, maybe for something like feature film. What I'm going to do is say I want everything. Maybe we're going to relabel them all. I want everything in that DVD collection. Now we can do one of two things. I select them all, and there's that ad hoc bulk change. If this is a one-time, quick and dirty, make a change to one field, that's fine. Or if I just want to reprint all the labels, I don't even need to do a bulk change, just reprint labels. But if what I want to do is batch these things, we put them in a record set. Remember we had a record set when we loaded bibliographic records? Now I have a record set of item records, and we'll call these DVDs to reassign. Maybe what I'm doing is these are all in a DVD collection. You can see that here. Maybe I've decided not to have a separate DVD collection. I just want one catch-all media collection. When I have items in a record set, I can come up to the bulk change and simply say, I want to change the collection code on all of those. We're going to stop using DVD and we're just going to assign everything to media. So I make that one change. You can tell it's very much like an ad hoc bulk change. And that will make the change. Some of them it changed and some of them it didn't. And you'll notice, I'm just kind of looking to see why, and you'll notice on this one that it did not make the change, the item status is withdrawn. So that's kind of like trying to divide by 0, right? Now, one last thing in cataloging. Record sets are incredibly powerful. This bulk change ability, you have it for item records. You also have it for patron records. Give me all the patrons who are over 18, whose patron code is not adult. You can select them all into a record set and change their patron code. One of the most powerful aspects is we can search for bibliographic records and put them in a record set and make bulk changes. So for example, I've got a pre-compiled search out here. I've got all these named searches all set up. And let's say I want to find all of my bibliographic records that have potential problems with a non-filing indicator. Patrons are complaining. You're a library and yet you've got so many things in the catalog that are sorting by the word A. And here are my results, 28 of 33 potential problems. And I can resort my list, and some of these are probably okay. In fact, there's one in Italian. Foreign languages are fine starting with A, but most of the rest of these probably need to be adjusted. Anyway, you find the ones that you want to make a bulk change to and do the same thing. We say add them to a record set. And here we're going to say, call it anything we want, non-filing indicator fixes. Oh, I've done this before. And we go up to the bulk change option. Now remember, these are bib records. This is a bulk change to the MARC records. You can change anything. You can change the fixed fields. You can change this metadata, the non-MARC data. But when we're talking the variable length fields, 1xx, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we can insert tags in subfields, delete tags in subfields, replace tags in subfields, and even correct non-filing indicators in bulk. So a lot of cleanup projects that we used to do with SQL scripts or one by one arduously, you can now undertake right within Polaris. So that is kind of an overview of Polaris cataloging. We talked about bib records, item records, we talked about the find tool, we talked about bulk changes. Some other things you'll probably go over in training. There is a wonderful label manager that allows you to print labels on demand. or batch them. And you can even type stuff in for a specific label if you want to make an exception. Define your own labels and what content goes on them. And that's about everything we wanted to cover for today. So thank you for joining the webinar. And those of you that are going to be on for tomorrow for acquisitions, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.